There would be no more global conflict, they said. The world was not so interconnected and dependent on global trade, they said, that nations would keep the peace to preserve their own economies. They were wrong. Many political commentators in the early 1900s were sure the industrial world was entering an era of permanent peace, a peace based on economic self-interest. Within just a few years, the fury of 1914 was poured out, followed soon after by the vainglory of 1939.
If you look at the world now, I think that you can't make a difference anymore between external and internal threats. Look at what happened in Zaventem a few weeks ago. Look what happened in Paris, Charlie Hebdo. Look what happened in the Bataclan. I think everybody knows that external and internal security are much more linked. So we have to work together.
Of course the nature of the threat has changed. We live in this highly globalized, smaller world, if you like. After all, when we're watching something on our television screens, our enemies are looking at exactly the same thing, probably at the same time that we are. So, you know, we live in an entirely different world, and there's a whole range of new threats which one wouldn't have imagined, say, 20 years ago. And I think particularly of the cyber threats, for example.
Just before we broadcast this program, the Financial Times reported that Germany is pushing for a European army with permanent joint headquarters and shared military assets. The German policy paper, which is supposed to be published in June, will not come as a great surprise to many in Brussels. But the idea of a European army will be met with strong resistance in several member states. But given that most of Europe's member states are already NATO members, would an EU army supporting EU policy be such a big step forward?
Everybody of us has too little money for defense. Everybody is challenged by these conflicts around us, and our American friends tell us, well, care for your backyard. So all those together, if that is not enough reason to make use of what we've got and to assemble the political will, I wouldn't know when, if not now.
The EU needs to keep out of the military game and leave that to NATO and to the nations. Maybe the EU has something to contribute in terms of its wider, what I would call soft security assets, whether it's humanitarian assistance, whether it's conflict prevention, or whether it's post-conflict reconstruction. These are the sorts of areas where possibly the EU can do useful things.
I know that we will not have a European army tomorrow. So what we say from the Liberal group is, let us look at cooperation. Much more cooperation than exists now. We have already Eurocorps, we have Visegrad, we have certain cooperations, but let us put them together. If we really want to have a voice in the world, we need one European army.
Today, the illusion of permanent peace has evaporated. So as EU High Representative Federica Mogherini is preparing an EU global strategy for foreign and security policy to be presented next month, she must maximize a small budget for a massive task. Is she facing mission impossible? Does China have global military ambitions, or is the rise of Chinese military investment just part of what an economically developed nation should do?
I think it's the latter. I think they really are coming from very far back. You know, there's no comparison with US military spending or even, European military spending. So they're really playing catch up in that sense. I think they have regional ambitions, but they're not about conquest or invasion. I think it's just a strong power needs a strong military presence.
The US State Department budget for 2016 is around 45 billion euros. This includes the international development aid and just over 6 billion euros for overseas contingency operations. The European Union's External Action Service total budget is 10.2 billion euros. On the face of it, a vast difference compared with the United States. But it's not a fair comparison. The European Union's foreign affairs and development aid budgets are in addition to the EU member states' own foreign affairs and development budgets.
We certainly don't need a European budget for defence. I come back to the point, it's with our member states. Now, when we have a collective international problem, we can either deal with it through NATO or a coalition of the willing.
NATO leaders made a declaration on defence spending that committed them to reaching the goal of 2% of GDP in the course of a decade. And the figures so far are somewhat encouraging. I believe it's right that about 16 NATO allies in 2015 increased their spending in real terms, and about 9 of those actually increased it in terms of GDP. The fall in defence spending that we've seen over many years now has pretty much stopped.
We are spending considerable amounts of money on security and defence, and a surprisingly small percentage of it is spent on cyber and anti-cyber warfare.
Do you think that's bad value for money in these days?
Well, military hardware is usually bad value for money unless you really want to use it.
Arguably, we're less likely to see tanks rolling across a border, more likely to see large-scale, devastating cyber activity.
With hybrid warfare, I first of all associate Mr. Putin and perhaps the Chinese as well. We have seen it both in Crimea, in the east of Ukraine.
China's more aggressive stance is a threat to a lot of Europe and NATO's partners in the region. And the most immediate threat, I would think, is the arms race that is carrying on very, very strongly. The French shipbuilder DCNS signed a major contract with the Australians to build submarines. Is this just the latest in an arms race that's going to continue? Good sign for European industry, perhaps not such a good sign for peace in Asia.
In this interconnected world, what happens between India and Pakistan is very important for us in terms of business as well. You know, Europeans need to sell. The Indian market is not that big at the moment. It's big, but it's not, it's not open big. And if there is a regional integration in South Asia, if countries are connected to each other, if their markets and their borders are open, this is manna from heaven for the EU business, for EU businesses, exporters, investors. So I think in this world, it's really interesting to see security is also about prosperity. It's also about how people find jobs. And I think economically vibrant South Asia would be very good for Europe.
Für uns ist es sehr wichtig, den Begriff Sicherheit zu definieren. Was ist Sicherheit? Sicherheit heißt aus meiner Sicht, dass Eltern sicher sein können, dass morgen ihre Kinder in eine gute Schule gehen können. Dass wir sicher sein können, dass wir unsere Mieten bezahlen können, dass wir unser Leben planen können. Das ist Sicherheit und diese Sicherheit braucht keine Waffen.
Euronet network member Polski Radio spoke with Polish Defence Minister Antoni Meszerics as he signed an official document paving the way to the creation of a new territorial defence force, a move he said was needed in the face of the aggressive intentions of Russia, aiming to destabilise the peaceful order in Europe, systematically endangering Poland and our immediate neighbours. Lisa Moore, a correspondent for Estonian Euronet member Sky, reports that the country's foreign intelligence service warns that the policies of the current Russian government will remain the greatest threat to the military security of the Baltic Sea region in the near future. However, a Russian attack against Estonia, it says, is unlikely.
It's perfectly true that Russian and NATO worldviews are very different. But the most important thing for NATO to do is to persuade any potential aggressor that it is not worth trying anything on against a member of this alliance.
Aus unserer Sicht ist die NATO immer mehr ein Teil des Problems, als dass die NATO Probleme löst. Von daher fordern wir als Linke, als Sozialistinnen und Sozialisten die Auflösung der NATO. Eine verstärkte Zusammenarbeit der EU mit der NATO wäre dann in dieser Hinsicht natürlich vollkommen absurd.
Should Europe be developing more its economic diplomacy and forgetting about the military side?
Definitely not. I think we are only taken serious if those who are able for soft power also have hard power in their toolbox. Otherwise, you're not taken seriously, even with a soft power approach.
There's just no way that you can survive continuous challenges on the entire periphery without having a military component for which there is political responsibility residing in the European Union and not in NATO as such.
How does China view Europe? How does Asia see Europe in terms of hard power and soft power? When Europe makes statements about South China Sea, for example, how do the Chinese view that?
They are worried that Europe is interfering in their backyard and that Europe's involvement will complicate things even further. Frankly, other countries, including China, have a more long-term view of what's going to happen in Africa. There are ups and downs, but on the whole, as you said, because of the demographic dividend that's there at the moment, the only continent in the world where you have a growing youth population, that's where the future lies. But we don't see it that way because we often have blinkers on. We see the trouble, we see the immigrants, we see the refugees, and we think, let's block it all off. But we're not making friends there if we do that.
When we look at a comprehensive European policy, what's missing at the moment? What really needs to be done?
The comprehensive, the real bringing together of all these various policies, all these different tools, all these financial instruments to really bring about change.
Europe is fighting for its continued existence. Its core values are at risk. Threats press from the inside and the outside. To meet these political and diplomatic challenges and to advance its economic agenda, Europe doesn't just need more investment in the External Action Service, it needs a clear sense of what European sovereignty means in the global arena. It's probably not possible to advance a definition of European sovereignty without diminishing the authority of member states. But do individual member states really have a big voice on the world stage? Isn't it better to direct all fire in one direction? But without a massively increased security and defence budget, Europe will be bound by the maxim that talk is cheap.